Welcome back to the MSU Deer Labs online seminar series brought to you by the Mississippi State University Extension Service and the Forest and Wildlife Research Center. I'm Bronson Strickland and I will be the presenter today. I'd like to also acknowledge my co-author, Steve Damaris, colleague of mine and co-director of the MSU Deer Lab. Today I want to focus on all of the aspects of getting a place prepared to plant for food plots. What are all the things you need to do ahead of time, planting equipment, etc. So that's really what this presentation is about, is the background and preparation for a food plot system on your property. Let's start out with what food plots are. I like to always use the word supplement, and that's even the title of a publication we developed on food plots. We called it Supplemental Wildlife Plantings. And I always like to emphasize the word supplement so people understand and keep it in context. You never want to replace managing deer habitat. That's always the foundation, providing good habitat, and that's both food and cover. And we view food plots as truly a supplement to that, adding a little more food to the system. You know, the other benefits that most everyone who's familiar with food plot knows is it's usually going to facilitate wildlife viewing, and not just deer, other wildlife as well. So it can become a hub of activity around these food plots, and so that's always and makes for an enjoyable outdoor experience. And then, of course, from a hunting perspective, food plots certainly will facilitate deer harvest. Can you overhunt a food plot? Can you change deer behavior? You absolutely can. But if done correctly, the use of food plots can be used very strategically on your property to facilitate harvest, whether it's chasing a particular buck or whether it's harvesting does to keep the population density under control. What food plots are not? I think it's important to make these distinctions. It's not a quick fix. Again, as I started, if you have not addressed your herd and habitat issues, food plots aren't going to help in the big picture and in the long run. You may have some short-term successes, again, with seeing a few more deer, facilitating some harvests, but it's not really going to improve the management of the herd per se. So it's never a substitute for habitat management, and it's never a substitute for herd management. You still have to put in the work with both of those, and again, food plots can then supplement those activities. So what is good wildlife habitat, or in the context of this presentation, we're going to focus on deer. What makes for good deer habitat? There'll certainly be other presentations where we really get into the specifics and mechanics of what deer need and how to manage for it and so forth, but real generally, just think of it like this. Deer eat plants, and you want to create an environment where the sunlight, or areas on your property where sunlight is able to reach the ground. It's not being totally captured by the canopy of the trees. Sunlight is hitting the ground and herbaceous plants are growing. And this is just a great example. Literally driving down the road one day and saw this. The broadleaf plants there, the flowers are blooming, and what do you know, there's a deer standing right beside it. Just a good example of the type of habitat that deer are seeking. And here's another example. Notice is that you can see the sky, the blue sky through there. And as a result, after a year or two, notice what sunlight has done. It has created an understory. And again, that is what most wildlife are going to use, is that understory vegetation. They're going to use it for food. They're going to use it for cover. Birds, they're going to use it for nesting. That's where we need to hide fawns. Does need to hide fawns for cover. So think about, these pictures I've presented here. Think about your property. And I totally understand that you can't do this on your entire property, or most people can't, especially if you lease property. But think about little areas where you can do something like this. Again, getting sunlight on the ground and letting Mother Nature do the rest of the work. So again, food plots are a supplement, and you can see here, this is really what we're talking about, is providing in a few areas, sometimes maybe just be a few acres, sometimes 5 to 10 acres or larger, but we're providing areas where we are growing a lot of plants, a lot of plant biomass that are very palatable to deer and very nutritious, with the goal, the end goal, is to raise diet quality somewhat. To give you some idea, I mean, if you really want to look at the numbers here of what you can do with food plots and what you can do with management and forest management designed for wildlife habitat, look at this comparison here. These are very general numbers. There's always exceptions, but in the southeast anyways, if you're in an unmanaged forest, and let me provide context. When I say unmanaged forest, I don't mean unmanaged from a forestry perspective. I mean unmanaged from a wildlife habitat perspective. So if your goal is wildlife habitat and it's not managed, probably only going to produce about 100 pounds of deer food per acre. And that's literally years of studies, different studies from around the southeast, where go to a forest that's not being managed for wildlife habitat, pick out the plants, identify the plants that deer eat, and literally clip them and weigh them and see what that forest is producing. And so in that case, only about 100 pounds, sometimes less, sometimes a little more. However, when you start managing the forest for wildlife habitat, and again, what I spoke about earlier, that's opening up the tree canopy, getting sunlight on the ground, you can easily produce 5-fold or 10-fold the amount of deer food per acre. So literally you can start approaching 1,000 pounds of deer food per acre, which is fantastic. And you think about the context of most operations at that scale is that you're doing these type of timber management or thinning operations over 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 or so acres. So a really big impact on deer diet quality. As a comparison, but at a much smaller scale, what can you do with food plots? Well, on a per acre basis, look at the yield you can get, especially with annual plants, cool season annual plants, warm season annual plants. An acre, if the food plot is managed well, can produce 3,000, sometimes up to 8,000 pounds per acre. That would be the warm season example with something like soybeans or cowpeas or maybe deer vetch, something like that. But that would be an extreme. So that just kind of gives you a comparison of if you're in a typical situation, the property isn't managed, you're getting only about 100 pounds per acre. You can get 500 to 1,000 when you start managing the forest for wildlife habitat, and then supplement that with your food plots. And now you are creating a situation where you are truly improving diet quality, and you can expect to see changes in the deer herd. Again, based on your objectives. It may be to raise the carrying capacity so that you have more deer. It may be from the perspective of I want to increase deer quality, body size, antler size, etc. Those are generally the steps you'd have to take to see that type of a return on your investment in the deer herd.